What works and what doesn't about Twitter? If there's something that's broken, how would you fix it?
A million things I can say here. So a few things. First is fact checking. I had this kind of fun, I thought it was a funny tweet. To anyone who wants to, quote, ban lying on social media, please write down a function that takes in a statement and returns whether it is true. If you can start with the Riemann hypothesis, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of funny, right?
That's funny.
And so now
that joke landed on like 5 people.
Sure. You want to explain the joke? Go.
Well, no, there's a lot of problems, decidability, where the truth, that's what proofs in math is. The truth of the thing is actually exceptionally difficult to determine. And that's just a really nice example.
Right.
The problems that persist across centuries that have not been solved by the most brilliant minds, they're essentially true or false problems.
That's right. And so when people are when they were saying they want to ban lying on social media, fact check social media, the assumption is that they know what is true. And what do they mean by that? They really mean the assertion of political power, right? With that said, do I think it could be useful to have some kind of, quote, fact checking thing? Yes, but it has to be decentralized and open source. You could imagine an interesting concept of coding Trugle, like a Google.
Yeah.
That return what was true.
Yes,
it's like a modified version,
like it.
Right? So like GPT-3, but the stable diffusion version where it's open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so now stable diffusion shows that it's possible to take an expensive AI model and put it out there, right? So you have, you know what a knowledge graph is?
Mm-hmm.
Like basically, you wouldn't actually, whether you have it as RDF or like a triple store kind of thing or some other representation, it's like an ontology of A is a B and, B has a C and it's got probabilities on the edges sometimes and other kinds of metadata. And this allows Google to show certain kinds of one box information where it's like, what is Steve Jobs's, what is Lorene Powell Jobs's age or birthday? They can pull that up out of the knowledge graph, right? And so you can imagine that Trugle would have both deterministic and statistical components. And crucially, it would say whether something is true according to a given knowledge graph. Mm-hmm. And so this way, at least what you can do is you can say, okay, here's the things that are consensus reality, like the value of the gravitational constant will be the same in the MAGA knowledge graph and the US establishment knowledge graph and the CCP knowledge graph and the Brazilian knowledge graph and so on and so forth. Okay. But there's other things that will be quite different. And at least now you can isolate where the point of disagreement is. And so you can have a form of decentralized fact checking that is like, according to who? Well, here is the authority and it is this knowledge graph, right? So that's like a kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is, so that's one concept of like what next social media looks like. There's actually so much more. Another huge thing is decentralized social media. Okay. Social media today is like China under communism in a really key sense. There's a great article called The Secret Document That Transformed China. Mm-hmm. Do you know what China was like before 1978?
I know about the atrocities.
Sure.
But there,
to put some flesh on the bone, so to speak.
Oh,
okay. So basically,
there's a good book I'm reading because I think a lot of documents became public recently. And so
there's a window when it opened up. Now it's probably closing back down again,
but great biographies because of that were written. Like I'm currently reading Mao's Great Famine by Frank DeCotter.
Yeah.
Which is, whoo boy.
It's crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the thing is capitalism was punishable by death in living memory in China. Just to explain what that meant. Okay. I mean, that's what communism was, right? It was literally the same China that has like the the entrepreneurs and Jack Ma and so on and so forth. 40-something years ago, capitalism was punishable by death. To give you a concrete example, this is a famous story in China, maybe apocryphal, but it's what, the folks have talked about. There's a village in Zhaogang, and basically all the grain that you were produced was supposed to go to the collective. And even one straw belonged to the group. At one meeting with Communist Party officials, a farmer asked, "What about the teeth in my head? Do I own those?" Answer, "No, your teeth belong to the collective." Okay. Now, the thing is that when you're taking 100% of everything, okay, work hard, don't work hard, everyone gets the same, so people don't want to work, right? So what happened? These farmers gathered in secret, and they did something that was like, would have gotten them executed. They wrote a contract amongst themselves and said, we all agree that we will be able to keep some of our own grain. We will give some of them to the regime, so when it comes to collect the grain, they've got something. We'll be able to keep some of it. And if any of us are killed for doing this, then the contract said that the others would take care of their children. Okay.
So
To keep some of what you earned. I mean, just think about how
they formed a mini capitalism society within the a secret capitalism society.
So what happened?
Amongst 5 people.
Now, right. So now that they could keep some of what they earned, right? Keep some of what they earned, they had a bumper harvest. And you know what happened with that bumper harvest? That made the local officials really suspicious and mad. They weren't happy that there was a bumper harvest. They're like, what are you doing? You're doing capitalism?
Yeah.
Right? And in, a few years earlier, they might have just been executed. Mm-hmm. And in fact, many were. That's what it means when you see millions dead. Millions dead means guys were shot for keeping some grain for themselves. Mm-hmm. Okay. It means like guys came and kicked in the door of your collective farm and, raped your wife and took you off to a prison camp and so on and so forth. That's what communism actually was. Okay. It hasn't been depicted in movies. There's a great post by Ken Billingsley in the year 2000 called, if I get this right, Hollywood's Missing Movies. Okay. This is basically here. I'll paste this link so you can put it in the show notes. All right. This is worth reading. It's still applicable today. But now that we have stable diffusion, now we have all these people online. Now that Russia and China are America's national bad guys, they, as they were before, they are again. Perhaps we'll get some movies on what communism actually was during the 20th century and how bad it was, right? And, vaccinate people against that as well as against Nazism, which they should be, okay? The point of this, go ahead.
No, because I'm congratulating myself on the nice, because you're sending me excellent links on WhatsApp, and I just saw that there's an export chat feature.
Yes, great.
Because we also have disappearing messages on, so I was like, all right, this is great.
Great.
I'll be able to get it. Your ability to reference sources is incredible, so thank you for this. Anyway,
otherwise, if I say something, it sounds too surprising, so that's why I want to make sure I have
on this topic.
Yeah. So I mean, people would be like shot for holding some grain. So what happened though was Deng Xiaoping said, okay, we're not going to kill you. In fact, we're going to actually set up the first special economic zone in Shenzhen. He didn't try to flip the whole country from communist to capitalist in one go. Instead, he's like, we can reform in one place. And in fact, he fenced it off from the rest of China. Yeah. And it did trade with Hong Kong. And he spent his political capital on this one exception. It grew so fast that gave him more political capital. Some people think actually that the, Sino-Vietnamese War was Deng's way of just distracting the generals while he was turning China around to get it back on the capitalist road. And what he did was the opposite of a rebranding. He did a reinterpretation. Like a rebranding is where the substance is the same, but the logo is changed. Okay. You were Facebook, you're now Meta. That's a rebranding, right? Reinterpretation is where the logo and the branding is the same. They're still the CCP, they're still the Chinese Communist Party, but they're capitalist now, the engine under the hood. It's deniable. Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is a very common, once you realize those are different things, it's like swap the front end, swap the back end.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good way to put it.
Right?
It's really good. Yeah, really good. I'm enjoying your metaphors and way of talking about stuff. Yeah, so I get, yeah. Swap, you could, rebranding is swap the front end, reinterpretation, swap the back end. Yeah.
That's right. Once you realize that, you're like, okay, I can, just like as an engineer, you can kind of, okay, sometimes I want to do this on the front end, sometimes I want to do the back end, sometimes it's explicit, and sometimes the user doesn't need to see it, and it's on the back end. Lots of political stuff, is arguably not just best done on the back end, but always done on the back end. Mm-hmm. One of the points I make in the book is left is the new right is the new left is, if you look through history, the Christian king, the Republican conservative, the CCP entrepreneur, the WASP establishment, these are all examples of a revolutionary left movement becoming the ruling class right. Mm-hmm. Okay, like the Republican conservative, just as that one example. I go through an extended description of this in the book, but the Republicans were the radical Republicans, the left of 1865. They won the revolution, and their moral authority led them to have economic authority in the late 1800s. You wouldn't want a Democrat Confederate trader as the head of your, railroad company, would you? Right? So all the Confederate traders, et cetera, were boxed out from the plum positions in the late 1800s. And so what happened was the Republicans turned their moral authority into economic authority, made tons of money. The Democrats then started repositioning, not as a party of the Southern racists, but the poor, right? And, the Cross of Gold speech by William Jennings Bryan was part of that. There's a gradual process that reaches not apotheosis, but let's say a crucial mark with the election of FDR, where it was actually not the 1932, but the 1936 election that black voters switched over to FDR. Okay, that was actually the major flip to like 70%, to the Democrats. Now they had repositioned as the party of the poor, not the party of the South. Okay, and Republicans had lost some economic authority, or rather, they had moral authority. They turned into economic authority. They started to lose some moral authority. The loss of moral authority was complete by 1965. That was actually mop-up. People dated, the civil rights movement as the big way where the Republicans lost moral authority. It's not really, that was a mop-up because 1936, 30 years earlier, was when black voters switched to the Democrats, okay? So 1965 was another 10 points moving over of black voters to the Democrats. Republicans had completely lost moral authority 100 years after the Civil War, okay? Mm-hmm. Then the next 50 years, that loss of moral authority meant that they lost economic authority, because now you wouldn't want a Republican bigot as a CEO of your tech company anymore, would you? Right? So by 2015, 2020, now you have, it's like two sine waves that are staggered, right? Moral authority leads to economic authority, leads to loss of moral authority, leads to loss of economic authority. And so now you have the Democrats, have, completed a 155-year arc from the defeated party in the Civil War to the dominant party in the U.S. establishment. All the woke capitalists are now at the very top. And now the same repositioning is happening where if you're so woke, why are you rich? You get it, right? Like, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich is the normal kind of thing, right? If you're so woke, if you're so holy, why is, like, for example, the BLM founder, why do they have this $1 million mansion, right? If you're so woke and it's all about being good and you're anti-capitalist, how come you seem to be raking in the money, et cetera, right? This is an argument which I'm not sure how long it will go. It might take years to play out. It might take decades to play out. I think probably on the order of a decade. You're going to see, in my view, the repositioning. If the Democrats are the woke capitalists, the Republicans will eventually are becoming the Bitcoin maximalists. Mm-hmm. Why? Because, if one guy picks left, the other guy picks right. It's literally like magnets kind of repelling. They're sort of forced into the other corner here, right? And the Bitcoin maximalists will essentially, where this guy says centralization, they say decentralization, where they defend the right of capital to do anything. The maximalists will say, actually, you're all cantillionaires. You're all benefiting from printed money. You don't have anything that's legitimate. You don't actually own anything. It's all a handout from the government, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's a counterpositioning that will basically attack the wokes by how much money they're making. Mm-hmm. They're not contesting the ideology. So when one guy signals economics, you signal culture. When the other guy signals culture, you signal economics. That's a whole thing I can talk about. Should I talk about that for a second?
Sure. Is this integrated into the forces that you talk about? You've talked about the three forces, the trifecta of forces that affect our society, which is the wokes, let's say.
Woke capital, communist capital,
woke capital. You talk so fast. It's and I think so slow.
No.
Woke capital, communist capital, and crypto capital. Can you explain each of those three? We actually talked about each of the three in part, but it'd be nice to bring them together in a beautiful triangle.
And then I will also come back up and I'll talk about how the CCP story relates to social media and decentralized social media.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So NYT, CCP, BTC is woke capital, communist capital, crypto capital. And communist capital is the simplest. It is you must submit. The Communist Party is powerful. CCP is powerful, and you are not. If you're in China, you just submit.
CCP is an embodiment of communist capital that you're talking about.
Well, yeah. So basically, and by the in China, they call it CPC. So basically, they don't like it usually if you say CCP, right? So like Communist Party of China as opposed to Chinese Communist Party. Basically, that is capitalism. That is a Chinese pool of capital, that billion-person pool. Okay, that's WeChat, and it's it's Alibaba, and it's that entire kind of thing. That is one just social network with currency. The whole thing is vertically integrated.
When we say communist, what do you mean here? Why is the word communist important? Why don't you just say China? So is communist an important word?
Or is it
just a catchy label?
It's a catchy label, but I think it's also important because it's paradoxical, right? So I had a thread on this. The future is communist capital versus woke capital versus crypto capital. Each represents a left-right fusion that's bizarre by the standards of the 1980s consensus. It's PRC versus MMT versus BTC, all right? And why is it bizarre by the standards of the 1980s consensus? Well, in the 1980s, you wouldn't think the communists would become capitalists, but they did. You wouldn't think that the wokes, the progressives, right, would become so enamored with giant corporations and their power, right? They've seen something to liken that, right? And you also wouldn't think that the non-Americans or the post-Americans or the internationalists would be the champions of capital because you'd think it's the American nation, right? So rather than the conservative American nationalists being the defenders of capital, you have the liberal Americans who are with capital, you have the communist Chinese who are with capital, and you have the internationalists who are with capital. And it's the conservative American nationalists who are in some ways against that, which is kind of funny, right? So it's like this weird ideological flippening that if you take the long lens, you have these poles that kind of repel each other. Okay, so just on the CCP NYT BTC thing,
NYT, by the way, is woke capital.
Yeah, what is NYT? So its formula is a little interesting. If CCP is just you must submit because they're powerful, okay, and then you bow your head because the Chinese Communist Party is strong. Woke capital is you must sympathize. Why do you bow your head, Lex? Oh, because you're a white male. Therefore, you're guilty. You sympathize. You must bow your head because you are powerful. Mm-hmm. Yet, notice it ends in the same place, in your head looking to the ground, right? In China, it's because they're powerful, so therefore you must bend your head. For the wokes, it's the left-handed version where you are powerful and that's shameful, so you should bow your head. Right?
Right.
Okay. But it ends in your head bowed. It's an ideology of submission. It's not that subtle, but it's like somewhat subtle. And then finally, crypto capital is head held high. You must be sovereign. Okay. And one of the things I point out in the book is each of these poles is negative in some ways when taken to extreme, but also negative in its opposite. For example, obviously just totally submitting to total surveillance is bad, but a society where nobody submits is San Francisco, where people just rob stores and walk out, in the middle, shoplifting, all these goods and nothing happens, right? A society where, you have the woke level of sympathy, where you get to the kind of insanity of math is white supremacist and whatever, nonsense is happening today is terrible. But a society that's totally stripped of sympathy is also not one that one would want to be part of, right? That's just like whether it's 4chan's actual culture or it's feigned culture or something like that, or some weird combination, that's also not good. It's like Russia in the 90s, like nobody trusts anybody. That's also bad. And, being totally sovereign, that sounds good. And there's a lot that is good about it. And I'm sympathetic to this corner. But being totally sovereign, you go so capitalist, so sovereign that you're against the division of labor. You don't trust anybody. So you have to pump your own water and so on. So you actually have a reduced standard of living over here. Okay. And conversely,
like survivalist or whatever.
Survivalist type of stuff, right? And you just kind of, you just go kind of too crazy into that corner. And then, like, of course, though, the other extreme of, having no sovereignty is you will own nothing and be happy. Everything's in the cloud and can be deleted at any point, right? So each of these is kind of has badness when it's there, but also its total extreme opposite is bad. And so you want to kind of carve out like an intelligent intermediate of these three poles, and that's the decentralized center or the re-centralized center, I call it. Now, with that said, I think there is a repositioning in particular of woke capital that is happening. And I think if the 2000s was the global war on terror, and then the channel just changed to wokeness in the 2010s. And when I mean channel change, have you seen Paul Graham's graph, or actually David Rosado's graph that Paul Graham posted?
No, but just a good chance to say that Paul Graham is awesome.
Okay, yeah. And so here is this graph. Okay, David Rosado's a data analyst, I think, that put this together. So basically, this is a graph of the word usage frequency in the New York Times, 1970 to 2018. And he's got some controls there.
Paul Graham tweets, hypothesis, although some newspapers can survive the switch to online subscriptions, none can do it and remain politically neutral. Quote, newspaper record. You have to pick a side to get people to subscribe. And there's a bunch of plots. On the x-axis is years. On the y-axis is the frequency of use. And sexism has been going up, misogyny has been going up, sexist, patriarchy, mansplaining, toxic masculinity, male privilege. All these terms have been going up very intensely in the past in the past decade.
Yeah, but really 2013 is the exact moment. You see these things, they're flat and then just go vertical. Mansplaining, toxic masculinity.
What precisely happened in 2013?
So I talk about this in the book, but I think fundamentally what happened was tech hurt media and their revenue dropped by about $50 billion over the 4 years from 2008 to 2012.
Yeah.
Tech helped Obama get reelected, and media was positive on tech until December 2012. They wrote like the nerds go marching in the Atlantic. Then after January 2013, once Obama was ensconced, then the knives came out because basically these tech guys were bankrupting them. They were through supporting them. And so the journals got extremely nasty, and just basically they couldn't build search engines or create social networks, but they could write stories and shape narratives. So a clear editorial direction went down that, essentially took all these weapons that had been developed in academia to win status competitions in humanities departments.
Yeah.
And then they just deployed them, right? And essentially somebody observed that wokeness is the combination of Foucauldian deconstruction and civil rights, where deconstruction takes away, the legitimacy of the old order, and then civil rights says, okay, the only thing that's good is this, right? Which says the old order was also bad in a different way, but this is what's good. And that is the underpinning ideology. The all these words have embedded in them like an ideology, right? Another way of thinking about it is, this is not my reference, but I'll cite it anyway. The glossary of the Greek military junta, right? The creation and or use of special terms that are employed by the junta as propaganda tools, because essentially the word itself embeds a concept. You can Russell conjugate something one way or the other, right? Russell conjugation is this concept that I sweat, you perspire, but she glows. You can always take something, you are uncontrollably angry, but he is righteously indignant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have a thin skin, they clap back, right? So once you kind of realize that these words have just been chosen in such a way as to delegitimize their target, and they all went vertical in 2013, and they were suddenly targeted against their erstwhile allies, in tech, but also just across the country, you can see that this great awakening, that's what Iglesias called it by play on words, the Great Awakening, right? Mm-hmm. This kind of spasm of quasi-religious extremism. I wouldn't call it religious because it's not God-centered. It's really state and network-centered. So I call it a doctrine, which is a superset of religion and political doctrine. These words went vertical, and all the terrorism stuff you just noticed kind of fell off a cliff. That was the obsession of everything in the 2000s, and just channel change, right? It's amazing how that happened.
Yeah,
it's not like any of the pieces got picked up. Some of those wars are still raging, of course.
And there's victims to this wokeism movement, and
but in a weird way, even though some parts of it, just like Syria, like there's wars in the Middle East that still keep raging. There's certainly active fronts of wokeism, but in a sense, the next shift is already on. You know why? It's a pivot from wokeism to statism. In many ways, NYT is sort of, and more generally the U.S. establishment is sort of kind of coming, you may not believe this, they're kind of coming back to the center a little bit, in the same way that Lenin, after the revolution, implemented the new economic policy, which you may be aware of, right? Which was just like X% more capitalism. He kind of boot on the neck, take control, but then ease up for a bit, and the so-called net men during the 20s were able to eke out something. There was like, oh, okay, fine, he's going to be easier on us. Then it intensified again because basically by loosening up, they were able to consolidate control. They weren't putting as much pressure on, right? Then it went extremely intense again, right? Similar to like Mao's like 100 flowers thing, let 100 flowers bloom. And, everybody came out, and then he found out all the people who were against him, and he executed a bunch of them, right? So what's happening now is NYT is, and more generally the U.S. establishment, is somewhat tacking back to the center, where, they're not talking BLM and abolish the police. They're saying fund the Capitol Police, right? They've gone from the narrative of 2020, which was meant to win a domestic contest, where they said America's a systemically racist country, tear down George Washington, we're so evil, to the rhetoric of 2022, which is we're the global champion of democracy and every non-white country is supposed to trust us. Now, obviously those are inconsistent, right? if you're in India or you're in Nigeria and you just heard that the America's calling itself, the same guys, by the way, saying it's so institutionally racist, systemically racist, and now you're saying, well, we're the leader of the free world and the number one. Obviously, there's an inconsistency between the domestic propaganda and the foreign propaganda, right? There's a contrast between abolish the police and put $2 billion for the Capitol Police. You can reconcile this and you can say the U.S. establishment is pro-federal and anti-local and state. So abolish the local police, who tend to be, Republican or rightist, but fund the FBI, fund the Capitol Police, who tend to be, just like in the, Soviet Union, the national things like the KGB, right? That were for the state, but there were always local nationalist ethnic insurgencies in like Estonia and other places, right? So you can reconcile them, but nevertheless, on its face, those are contradictory. So what are you going to get? I think you're going to get this rotation where a fair number of the folks on the sort of authoritarian right are kind of pulled back into the fold a bit. Okay. These are the cops and the military and whatnot, some of them, because as this decade progresses, you're going to see the signaling on American statism as opposed to wokeism, okay, which is 30 degrees back towards the center, right? Conversely, on the other side, you're going to have the left libertarians and right libertarians who are signaling crypto and decentralization and so on, okay? And so the next one isn't red versus blue, it's orange versus green. It's the dollar versus Bitcoin. And so you have the authoritarians, the top of the political compass versus the quote libertarians, right? And here's the visual of that. So that's why, like, as I wrote the book and after I was like, I'm already seeing this this shift happening from war on terror to wokeism to American statism, right? And here, just take a look at this visual.
Interesting. So the visual is an animation transforming the left versus right, libertarian versus authoritarian to Bitcoin, dollar versus crypto.
That's right. And some folks switch sides, right? Because you have folks like, Jack Dorsey and a lot of the tech founders in basically the lower left corner, right? Who were blue, but are now going to become orange or are orange. And you have folks in the upper right corner who are going to, at the end of the day, pick the dollar and the American flag over the internationalist ideals of cryptocurrency.
The realigning, as you call it. Let me ask you, briefly, we do need to get a comment, your visionary view of things. We're at a low point in the cryptocurrency space from a shallow analysis perspective, or maybe in a deeper sense, if you can enlighten me. Do you think Bitcoin will rise again?
Yes.
Do you think it will go to take on fiat, to go over $1 million, to go to these heights?
I mean, I think it's possible. And the reason I think it's possible is I think a lot of things might go to $1 million because inflation.
Because inflation.
Right.
That
was an important point, right?
Yes, it's a very important point, yes.
Because you're seeing essentially...
Yes.
Right. The choke pointing on energy is pushing up prices across the board for a lot of things. The supply, China's not doing us any favors with the COVID lockdowns. Putin's not doing the world any favors with this giant war. There's a lot of bad things happening in the physical world, right? You have, when China, Russia, and the US are all, and Europe is, there's folks who are just insane about degrowth and they're against, they're pushing for burning coal and wood, right? So a lot of prices are going up in a really foundational and fundamental way. And with that said, also the dollar is in some ways strengthening against certain other things because a lot of other countries are dying harder, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got riots in Sri Lanka and riots in Panama and riots in, all these places, right? So it's very complicated because you've got multiple different trends going in the same way. Your Bitcoin Maximus would just say infinity over 21 million. And so therefore you print all the dollars, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So Bitcoin goes to infinity. But it can be something where lots of other currencies die and the dollar is actually exported via stable coins. Mm-hmm. Okay. But I do think
fiat still moves somehow into the cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like Microsoft where, Windows is still around, right? Microsoft's still around, still a multi-$100 billion company. It had
He doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean it. Don't worry. All my machines are Windows and
Are they?
Linux dual boot. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know a single Mac.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That you are unusual on that.
Yeah.
That's so at least for our
It's not ideology, just convenience.
fine. I mean, they actually now post Satya, they do make some good stuff, right? Like Microsoft Teams is good, right?
Yeah,
like,
there's a lot of incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And the new CEO has done a lot of innovative things, like GitHub.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's an acquisition, but still, I give them credit for it.
The acquisition, the pivoting of vision and motivations and focus and all that kind of stuff.
So,
anyway, yes,
okay.
Microsoft is an analogy, metaphor for something.
Well, yeah. So basically, just like they didn't need a turnaround, but they did endure to the present day. They didn't die from Google app. I mean, for the massive attacks on them, they didn't die. They are less powerful, but they make more money, right?
Yes.
And I think that might be something that our best case scenario is the U.S. establishment or CCP has more power over fewer people. Okay,
I see.
And so but you can exit. If you're there, you're kind of knuckling under or whatever, but you can exit, right? And so I mentioned those three poles. CCP is obviously 1 billion people, 1.4 aligned under the digital yuan, and so on, right? NYT is the entire, it's the tech companies, it's the US dollar, it is the establishment, and then crypto capital is everybody else. But I actually think that over time, that third world is Web3 this time, and that's the third pole, and that's India and it's Israel, and it's lots of American conservatives and left libertarians and libertarians, and it's also lots of Chinese liberals, all the folks who are trying to get out of China because it's become so nationalist and crazy and difficult for capitalism. And so if you take basically non-establishment Americans on both left and right, okay, the bottom two quadrants in the political compass I talked about. You take the liberal Chinese, you take the Israelis and the Indians. Why? Because both of them have a lot of tech talent, right? They're the number one and number two demographics for tech founders. And they want to, while they are generally sympathetic to the West, right? And they have more ties to the West, they also are more cautious about national interest rather than just starting fights, where that's how they would think about it, right? They just, India thinks of itself as a poor country, Israel thinks of itself as a small country, and so therefore it needs to not just get in every fight just for the sake of it, and so need to maintain a cautious distance with China, but not like do what Pelosi is doing and try and start like a big thing, okay? I think Israel is similar, where it's maintaining diplomatic relations with China. It's more friendly towards China than the U.S. is. India and Israel, I think, are two sovereign states that have a lot of globally mobile tech talent that obviously have ties to the West with a large diaspora that are hard to demonize, or in the sense of willing to argue on the internet. Let's put it like that, in English, right? It's very important. And them plus enough Americans plus enough Chinese can set up another pole that is not for Cold War or military confrontation, but for peace and trade and freedom and so on and so forth, right? That's the center, as opposed to the, left of the, the woke American U.S. establishment or the right of the ultra-nationalist CCP, right? That's what I think about. Now, what I would say here is the reason I think these are the kind of the three poles, you can argue against this, right? You can say it's a unipolar world. America's totally dominant. That's one argument. You could say it's a bipolar world. It's just the U.S. versus China. No, everybody else will have to be forced to align with one or the other. Jayashankar, actually explicitly rejected this. He's like, look, there's 1 billion people in India. It's coming up on, it will eventually be like the number 3 economy. It's on the rise. He's got the history and culture. He thinks he's entitled to have, India's entitled to have its own side, right? In such a thing. It's a funny way of putting it, right?
Yeah.
But it's also true. And so you could say it's unipolar, you could say it's bipolar, you could say it's just multipolar, and everybody is kind of there, India, Israel, these groups are out there. But I actually think it's going to be tripolar. And the reason it's tripolar is these three pools are the groups that have enough media and money and scale and whatnot to really kind of be self-consistent civilizations. Obviously, China's like the vertically integrated, like Apple or whatever, just like one country.
Maybe a stable ideology.
A stable ideology. That's right. Right. Obviously, the wokes have control of lots of institutions. They've got the U.S. establishment, and they've got the tech companies, they've got the media companies, and so on. But crypto is basically everybody else, and crucially, crypto has inroads in China and America, where it's hard to demonize it as completely foreign because there's many, many, many huge proponents of the universalist values of crypto in America and China because it is true global rule of law and free speech and, so on. It is genuinely universalist in a way where America can no longer be, the number one rule of the rules-based order is America is always number one.
Mm-hmm.
And China doesn't even pretend to maintain a rules-based order, right?
Yes.
Whereas for all those countries that don't want to either be dominated by the US media corporations or social media that can just censor Trump, nor do they want to be dominated by China, this is an attractive alternative, a platform they can make their own, right? So that's where I think, I wrote an article on this in Foreign Policy on here's two articles that talk about this a little bit. It's called Great Protocol Politics. And then here's another one on the sort of domestic thing. Bitcoin is civilization for Barry Weiss. Okay. But I want to just come up the stack a little bit and just return to that original point, which I diverged on, which was why I gave the whole example of how we got into China because I talked about how China had gone from communist to capitalist and letting people have just a share of what they owned, right? With social media, we're still in kind of the communist era of social media almost, where whatever you earn on social media, like Google takes its cut, Twitter takes 100%. You're nothing for all your tweets or anything like that. Not only do you earn nothing, you might get a little rev share on TikTok or YouTube. You can do okay, right? But not only do you earn either nothing or a little bit, you have no digital property rights, even more fundamentally. You are at just the whim of a giant corporation can hit a button and everything you worked for over years, gone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That is, even if that is, quote, the current state of events, the state of affairs, rather, that is not the right balance of power. To be able to unperson somebody at the touch of a key and take away everything in their digital world when we're living more and more in the digital world, we need a check on that power. And the check on that power is crypto and its property rights and its decentralization, right? And when I say decentralization, I mean your money and your digital property is by default yours. And there has to be a due process for someone to take that away from you. Everything, all work is online. All your money is online. Your presence is online. If that can just be taken away from you with a press of a key, that just gives, bad governments, bad corporations so much power that's wrong, right? Yeah. That's why I'm a medium and long-term bull on crypto, simply because it's a check on this thing. And that if you think about it in terms of just abstract decentralization is one thing, but if you think about it in terms of property rights, it's quite another. And now, what that also means is once you have property rights and you have decentralized social media, it'll be like the explosion of trade that happened after China went from communist to capitalist. Literally billions of people around the world are no longer giving everything to the collective. They own the teeth in their head now, finally. Okay. Yeah. It's funny, right? Yeah. So your Lex Fridman.eth, you own it. The keys are on your computer. The bad part is, of course, they can get hacked or something like that. Then you can deal with that with social recovery. There's ways of securing keys. But the good part is, you actually have property rights in the Hernando de Soto sense. You have something you own, ownership, digital ownership. The cloud is great, but crypto gives you some of the functionality of the cloud while also having some of the functionality of the offline world where you have the keys. So it's a V3, right? It's a continuous theme, right? The V1 was offline. I've got a key. I own it. I have de facto control. V2 is the cloud. Someone else manages it for me. It's hosted. I get collaboration and so on. V3 is the chain where you combine aspects of those, right? You have the global state of the cloud, but you have the local permission and controlling of the private key, okay? So that's why I'm a medium to long-term ultra bull on crypto. And there's a podcast I gave with Asimco where I talked through how crypto actually doesn't just go after finance. So it's gold and it's wire transfers and it's crowdfunding and it's all finance with DeFi, but it's actually also search and it's social and it's messaging. It's actually even operating systems and eventually cloud and whatnot. Do you want me to talk about that briefly?
Yeah. If you can briefly see, so
sure, very briefly.
How broad you see the effect of crypto.
So first, crypto is fundamentally a new way of building backend systems, right? So if you think about how big a deal it was to go from AT&T's corporate Unix to Linux, it's permissionless, right? When you went from, as much as I admire a lot of the stuff that Sam Altman and Greg Brockman have done at OpenAI, I mean, they're phenomenal in terms of research. They've pushed the envelope forward. I give them a ton of credit, right? Still, it was great to see Stable Diffusion out there, which was open source AI, right? Mm-hmm. And so from a developer, from a power user standpoint, whenever you have the unlocked version, like an unlocked cell phone, it's always going to be better, right? So the what crypto gives you, obviously it's every financial thing in the world. You can do stocks, bonds, et cetera. It's not just like the internet wasn't just a a channel. It wasn't like radio and TV and internet. It was internet radio and internet TV and internet this and internet that. Everything was the internet. All media became the internet. Crypto is not an asset class. It's all asset classes. It's crypto stocks and crypto bonds, et cetera. In a real sense, like private property arguably didn't exist in the same way before crypto. International law didn't exist before crypto. How are you going to do a deal between Brazil and Bangladesh? If a Brazilian company wants to, acquire a Bangladeshi company, they usually have to set up a U.S. adapter in between, because otherwise, what are the tax or the, other obligations between the two? You set up a U.S. adapter or a Chinese adapter to go between. But now that Brazilian and Bangladeshi can go peer to peer because they're using the blockchain, right? They can agree on a system of law that is completely, international, and that's code, so each party can diligence it without speaking Portuguese and Bengali, right? So that's why I am a long-term bull on crypto. I just described the finance case. Let me go through the others, right? Social. So you have the private keys for your ENS. You have apps like Farcaster. You basically have decentralized social media where there's different variants. Some you just log in with your crypto username. Others, the entire social network and all the likes and posts are on chain, like DeSo. But there's several different versions, right? Search. Once you realize block explorers are an important stealth threat to search. They're very high traffic sites like blockchain.com and Etherscan that Google is just totally slept on. They don't have a block explorer. You don't have to do anything in terms of trading or anything like that. Google does not have a block explorer. Why? They don't think of it as search, but it is search. It's absolutely search. It's a very important kind of search engine. And once you have crypto social, you now show that you're not just indexing in a block explorer like on-chain transactions, but on-chain communications. Okay. So now you suddenly see, the entire social web that Google couldn't index. It could only index the World Wide Web and not the social web. Now it's actually the on-chain signed web, right? Because every post is digitally signed. It's a new set of signals. It's way easier to index than either the World Wide Web or the social web because it's open and public. So this is a total disruptive thing to search in the medium term because it's a new kind of data set to index, right? So that's how it's a threat to social, to search. It is a threat to messaging. Why? Or it's disrupt eventually because the ENS name, as I mentioned, is like a universal identifier. You can send encrypted messages between people. That's a better primitive to base it on. WhatsApp is just claiming that they're end-to-end encrypted. But with an ENS name or with a crypto name, you can be provably, audibly end-to-end encrypted because you're actually sending it back and forth, right? Because the private key is local, right? That itself, given how important that is, right? You could man-in-the-middle Signal or WhatsApp because there's a server there, right? If you have, so end-to-end encrypted messaging will happen, and with payments and all this other stuff, okay? So you get the crypto messaging apps. You get operating systems. Why? Well, the frontier of operating systems, look, Windows, Linux, and Mac OS have been around forever. But if you actually think about, what is a blockchain? Well, there's operating systems, there's web browsers. A blockchain is the most complicated thing since an operating system or web browser because it's a kind of operating system. Why? It's got, something like Ethereum has an EVM. It's got a programming language. It's got an ecosystem where people monetize on it. They build front-end apps and they build back-end apps. They interoperate between each other. This is the frontier of operating systems research. Mm-hmm. People haven't thought of it that way, right? It's also the frontier of a lot of things in databases. You will get a crypto LinkedIn where there's zero-knowledge proofs of various credentials, okay? Basically, every single Web2 company, I can probably come up with a Web3 variant of it, right? Like Ethereum is, and this is high praise for both parties, but Ethereum is like the crypto Stripe, right? Or the Web3 Stripe. And you will see versions of everything else that are like this. But, I kind of described search, social, messaging, operating systems, the phone, right? Solana's doing a crypto phone. Why do you want that? Again, digital property. Apple was talking about running some script to find if people were having, CSAM, like child porn or whatever on their phones, right? And even NYT actually reported that like Google ran something like this and found false positives. Some guy had to take a photo of a kid for medical diagnosis. It got falsely flagged as CSAM. He lost access to his account. Total nightmare. Imagine just getting locked out of your Google account, which you're so dependent on, right? Mm-hmm. As more and more of your digital life goes online, is it really that much ethically different if it's the Chinese state that locks you out or an American corporation, right? Basically, it's operationally very similar. You just have no recourse. You're unpersoned, right? So the crypto phone becomes like insanely important because you have a local set of private keys. Those are the keys to your currency and your passport and your services and your life, right? So it like becomes something you just hold on you with your person at all times, like your normal phone. You might have backups and stuff, but the crypto phone is an insanely important thing. Okay. And so that's search, that's social, that's messaging, that's operating systems, that's a phone. That's a lot right there.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Can I have 120 seconds to just finish up a few more thoughts on social media?
Yes, please.
Okay. AI and AR. Okay. There's massive impact, obviously, of AI and social media. You're going to have completely new social media companies, gestures, other things. TikTok having some of the AI creation tools in there is just like a V1 of that. There's this whole thread with everything Stable Diffusion is unlocking. But basically, this is going to melt Hollywood. US media corporations that took a hit in the 2010s, we're now going to be able to have everyone around the world able to tell their story. And all the stuff about AI ethics and AI bias, the ultimate bias is centralized AI.
Mm-hmm.
Only decentralized AI is truly representative. You cannot be faux representative. You cannot claim that Google is representing Nigerians and Indians and Brazilians and Japanese. Like those folks need to have access themselves, right? So that's a fundamental ethical argument against centralized AI. It's unethical. And it's like, this faux thing where you might have like faux diversity in the interface, but you haven't actually truly decentralized it. This is the woke capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. You justify it with the wokeness and you make the money by centralizing it. But the actual way of doing it is letting it free for the world and letting people build their own versions. If people want to build a Asian Lord of the Rings, they can do that. If they want to build an Indian one, they can do that. If they, whatever they want, right? So that is the argument for AI decentralization and for how that kind of links to this.
I love that AI decentralization fixes the bias problem in AI, which a lot of people seem to
centralization
talk about and focus on.
Yeah, centralization is inherently unrepresentative. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, like you can like mathematically show it. It's not representing the world. The decentralization allows anybody to pick it up and make it their own, right? And centralization is almost always a mask for like that private corporate interest, where it's like one of the things about the woke capitalism thing, by the way, is the deplatforming of Trump was political. Other things are political. But do you know what deplatforming started with? In the late 2000s, early 2010s, all the open social stuff was when deplatforming was being used as a corporate weapon against Meerkat and Zynga and Teespring, right? These were companies that were competing with features of, TweetDeck, et cetera. They're competing with features of Twitter or Facebook, and the API was cut off. And that was when actually progressives were for net neutrality and an open internet and open social against the concentration of corporate power and so on. Remember that, right? And so what's going to happen is both those two things, the political and the corporate, are going to come together. Why? In the Soviet Union, denunciation was used as a tool to, for example, undercut romantic rivals. Right. There's a great article called "The Practice of Denunciation in the Soviet Union," right, which talks about all these examples where the ideological argument was used to like kick somebody into the 300 like pit that existed at like the center of the Soviet Union. Anybody could be kicked into the pit at any moment. And ta-da! Well, Ivan's out, and now hey Anna, or whatever, right? Okay, that same thing is going to be used by woke capitalists. Is being used by woke capitalists, where the woke argument is used to justify pushing their competitor out of the app store or down-ranking them in search. Well, again, you wouldn't want a bigot to be in search who could compete with us or whatever, right? And conversely, so the wokeness is used to make money, and the money is used to advance the ideology. It's like this kind of back and forth. Sometimes, right now, you think of those as independent things, but then they fuse, okay? And so that's very clear with the AI bias arguments, where it just so happens that it's so powerful, Lex. This technology is so powerful in the wrong hands, it could be used. So we will charge you $9.99 for every use of it. How's that? How altruistic is that? Is that amazingly altruistic? It's really good, right? So once you kind of see that, as I said, whenever they're positioning on economics, you can go on culture. When they're positioning on culture, you can go on economics. If they're so woke, why are they rich? If they're so concerned about representation, why is it centralized? Answer: they're not actually concerned about it. They're making money. Right? Okay. So that is, I think, in a few words, blows up a lot of the AI bias type stuff, right? Okay. They're biasing AI. All right. So the amount of stuff that can be done with AI now, like it also helps the pseudonymous economy, as I was talking about with the AI Zoom. So you have totally new sites, totally new apps that are based on that. I think it may. It changes. You're going to have new Google Docs, all these kinds of things. You might have, once you can do things with just a few taps, you might have sites that are focused more on producing rather than just consuming, because, you might, with AI, you can change the productivity of gestures. You can have a few gestures for example, the image to image thing with Stable Diffusion, where you make a little cartoon third graders painting and it becomes a real painting. A lot of user interfaces will be rethought now that you can actually do this incredible stuff with AI. It knows what you want it to do, right? So, and I saw this funny thing, which was a riff on Peter Thiel's line, which is AI is centralized and crypto is decentralized. And somebody was saying, actually, it turns out crypto is centralized with the CBDCs and stablecoin and so on, but AI is getting decentralized with Stable Diffusion, haha, right? Which is funny. And I think there's centralized and decentralized versions of each of these, right? And finally, the third pole that actually, Thiel, he talks about AI and crypto, but the third pole is actually that's sort of underappreciated because people think it already exists, is social. That just is keeping on going, right? And obviously, the next step in social is AR and VR. And why is it so obvious? Because it's Meta, it's Facebook. Now, I saw this very silly article. It's like, oh my God, Facebook is so dumb for putting $10 billion into, virtual reality, right? And I'm like, okay, the most predictable innovation in the world, in my view, is the AR glasses. Have you talked about this on the podcast before?
AR and VR? I mean, of course, a lot, but the AR is not as obvious, actually.
Okay, so AR glasses. What are AR glasses? So you take Snapchat Spectacles, Google Glass, Apple's AR kit, Facebook's Oculus Quest 2, right? Mm-hmm. Or Meta Quest 2, whatever. Okay, you put those together, and what do you get? You get something that has the form factor of glasses that you'd wear outside. Okay, which can, with a tap, record or give you Terminator vision on something, or with another tap go totally dark and become VR glasses. Mm-hmm. Okay, so normal glasses, AR glasses, VR glasses, recording. It's as multifunctional as your phone, but it's hands-free. And you might actually even wear it more than your phone. In fact, you might be blind without your AR glasses because, one of the things I've shown in the book early on are like floating sigils. Did I show you that? No. So this is a really important, just visual concept. That right there shows with ARKit, you can see a globe floating outside. Okay. Secret societies are returning. This is what NFTs will become. The NFT locally on your crypto phone, if you hold it, you can see the symbol. And if you don't, you can't.
By the way, for people just listening, we're looking at a nice nature scene where an artificially created globe is floating in the air.
Yes, but it's invisible if you're not holding up the ARKit phone.
Yes.
Right? So
only you have a window into this artificial world.
That's right. And then here is another thing, which shows you another piece of it. And this is using ENS to unlock a door. So this is an NFT used for something different. So the first one is using the NFT effectively to see something. And the second is using the NFT to do something. Mm-hmm. Okay. So based on your on-chain communication, right, you can unlock a door. That's the door to a room. Soon it could be a door to a building. It could be the gates to a community. Mm-hmm. It could be your digital login. Okay. And so
amazing.
What this means is basically a lot of these things, which are like individual pieces, get synthesized, right? And you eventually have a digital, just like you have a digital currency, or digital currencies unify concepts like obviously gold, stocks, bonds, derivatives, every kind of financial instrument, plus Chuck E. Cheese tokens, karma, everything that's fungible and transferable. The digital passport unifies your Google style login, your private keys, your API keys, your NFTs, your ENS name, your domain name, all those kinds of things, and your key card for your door and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So the AR glasses are what probably, I don't know, it'll be Facebook's version 3 or version 4. Apple is also working on them. Google's also working on them. You might just get a bunch of those models at the same time. It's like predicting the iPhone, just like, Dorsey knew that mobile was going to be big. And that's why he had 140 characters for Twitter, because there's like an SMS code limitation and Twitter was started before the iPhone. AR glasses are an incredibly predictable invention that you can start thinking about. The future of social is in part in person. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it also means people might go outside more. Why? Because you can't see a monitor in the sun, but you could hit AR and maybe you have a, full screen thing and you just like kind of move your fingers or something and you can tap. You have to figure out the gesture. You don't want to have gorilla arms. Maybe you do have a keyboard outside or just even like you could even have a desk like this. If you had, if you can touch type, you can imagine something where you look down and you can see a keyboard with your AR glasses and it registers it. And then you can type like this, right? And probably you could have some AI that could, figure out what you meant rather than what you were doing, right? Okay. So that's AI and social media. That's AR and social media. But really, one last thing I'll say, which is the non-obvious, non-technological part, is I think we'll go from very broad networks, which are hundreds of millions or billions of people, like Twitter and Facebook, which have many small communities in them, to much smaller networks that have 1 million or 10 million people, but are much deeper, right, in terms of their affiliation, right? And this is the long-term trend in tech, because you're going from eyeballs in the 1980s, eyeballs in the 1990s, to daily active users in the 2000s, to holders in the 2010s. So you go from just like, I'm just a looky-loo, to I'm logging in every day, to I'm holding a significant percentage of my net worth. And then this decade is when the online community becomes primary. You're a netizen. The digital passport is your main identity. And so this is not, the problem with Facebook or Twitter is it's a bunch of different communities that don't share the same values fighting with each other. This brings us back to the network state where you have one community with shared values, shared currency, and it's full stack. It's a social network, and it's a cryptocurrency, and it's a co-living community, and it's a messaging app, and it's a this, and it's a that. And it's like Estonia, with 1 million people, you can actually build a lot of that full stack. That starts to get to what I call a network state.
I feel like there should be like a standing applause line here. This is brilliant. You're an incredible person. This was an incredible conversation. We covered how to fix our government, looking at the future of governments, moving into network state. We covered how to fix medicine, FDA, longevity. That was just like a stellar description. I'll have to listen to that multiple times to really think. And thank you for that, especially in this time where the lessons learned from the pandemic are unclear to at least me. And there's a lot of thinking that needs to be done there. And then just a discussion about how to fix social media and how to fix money. This was brilliant.